I'm here with Don Porter, the director of The Way I See It, and the subject of the film, photographer Pete Souza. Don, Pete, welcome. Thanks so much for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Don, I want to start with you, and maybe if we could start at the beginning for this project for you. When did you know that you wanted to tell Pete's story and that his story was going to be so much more than just taking photos in the White House?
Well, I was approached by the producers, Jamie Lemons and Evan Hayes, and they were like obsessed with Pete and his photographs. And so they asked me to come to Los Angeles and meet with them. And they rolled out this like whole pitch, and I was like, well, that's interesting. And, you know, my father was a photographer, so I do have kind of a special place in my heart for photographers. But the real time that this grabbed me, it was Pete came to Los Angeles. I think he was still living in DC at the time, and he came to Los Angeles, and he just kind of pulls out his laptop and he starts going through the pictures, and he starts talking about the pictures. And it was kind of a low-tech version of the show that he does. And in the middle of him going through the pictures, I like started to cry and just realized there was something extremely powerful about the simplicity of what he was doing. He was literally just showing us what had been there for a while. So,
was there a particular photo that prompted you to cry, or was it just the overall impact?
You know, it's actually the cumulative impact of seeing a hardworking team, people with compassion and empathy and decency. And I felt like I'd been holding my breath for 3 years, and just seeing, you know, Pete's photos allow us to see that it wasn't all a dream. It's not that President Obama is perfect or made every decision that I agree with. That's not the point. The point is we just had a really decent person who did his best. And really put the welfare of the nation before his own objectives. And Pete's photos just, it's all right there.
You know, I feel like I had a very similar effect on me watching the film, because in addition to just the historic nature of the Obama presidency, there was something in this remarkable group of people who did seem to reflect America maybe better than the current administration staff would, coming together to do this work. And it's almost 4 years since Obama left office, and it's almost, you're nostalgic. It wasn't that long ago, but it feels like it's an entirely different world now. And I wonder if coming out now, you expect the film to have a similar impact on people, maybe especially in the US.
I think it will. Everyone I know who's seen the film already, and, you know, your audience is really going to be the first wide audience to see it. People say the same thing, which is how moved they are, how it's kind of like we didn't maybe appreciate what we had. But I think it's also a testament to the way that Pete has presented the photos in a way that's very accessible. You know, it's not intimidating. And I think the comfort that he and the president shared is evident. And so you really feel like you have this window into this extraordinary time.
Pete, there's so much I want to ask you about making these photos, but maybe we can start with this idea of the context of them. The context now is so different than when you were taking them. And the emotional content changes as well with a different context. As you're looking at your photos again and presenting them to audiences, and looking at how this film is coming together, how do you see that kind of emotional transition between maybe the moment when you took the photo, what it meant then, and what it means now?
Well, I think at the time, people were going about their lives and weren't necessarily looking at, you know, the White House Flickr photo stream or whitehouse.gov. And what's interesting to me now is when I post some photographs on Instagram, it's as if people are seeing them for the first time. And oftentimes they are seeing them for the first time, even though they had been made public at the time. I think people are looking for something to hold on to. And I think the photographs help bridge that gap a little bit, that what we're going through now is not normal. And what I'm showing them is normal. That this was, a man who respected the office of the presidency, knew that it was about us and not about him. You mentioned the staff. It was much more reflecting of what America is in terms of the race and the gender of the people in the room where it happened. So I think I could go on and on. There's so many layers to this. I think people are just touched by almost the normalcy of his presidency and the way he behaved and the way he presented himself to the individual people in my photographs, but also the way that presented itself to the or presents itself to the country.
You have gone through a political evolution as well through the photographs and how you use them now. And that's chronicled in part in the film. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit about just the breadth of that evolution. You were a chronicler, that was your profession, but you've become an advocate through your photographs as well. Can you talk a little bit about that trajectory?
One of my favorite comments in the film is by Ben Rhodes, who was a deputy national security advisor, where he has almost this chuckle when he describes, I never expected to see Pete on a TV show, because he's like a behind the scenes guy.
He says, I didn't expect to see him talking.
Yeah. And it's sort of like, there's some people that don't think I should be speaking out. But at the same time, it's sort of like, how could I not? I mean, I come at this from a unique perspective, not only having worked for President Obama, who I consider, a friend, he considers me a friend, but also, I worked for Ronald Reagan, arguably the most iconic Republican president of our generation. So this is not a partisan thing. I wouldn't have gone this route if, Jeb Bush or Mitt Romney or John McCain or John Kasich, or I could, go on and on, because I think all of them would have respected the office of the presidency and are decent Americans and decent human beings. This is more about, the way I felt the office of the presidency was being disrespected. Lying from the White House podium day after day after day is not the way a president should behave. And I just didn't feel I couldn't say anything. And it was, there was something stirring up inside of me that I think slowly came out over time. And it got, as I say in the film, I got more and more pointed in my Instagram posts, because I was very subtle at first and humorous. And I think over time it evolved into just outright criticism, or more pointed post using my photographs.
I want to ask you about Reagan and Obama. There's not just decades that separate them and the fact that one was Republican and one Democrat, but also photography changed, pop culture changed, just the circulation of images changed between those two presidents. And I want to ask you, Pete, about how your approach might have changed between photographing in the Reagan White House as opposed to the Obama White House, and down also in terms of having those images to use from both presidencies, how you made choices about the balance you wanted to strike in the film.
Do you want me to go first? Or?
Sure, yeah.
Well, I have to say, one of the funniest things of when they finally showed me a rough cut of the film was seeing all the old video that they had uncovered of me with Reagan, some of which I had never seen before. So it's kind of like, oh my God, a long time ago. And, you know, it's like, as you say, it was just a different time. I was not the chief photographer for Reagan. I was one of the staff official photographers. So my access was not on the level it was with President Obama. But it was a different time. And I don't think that I photographed any differently between the two. It's just that when I was with Reagan, I was basically just starting out my career. So I was definitely, you know, I was in my 20s when I started. I was definitely hadn't yet, I think, become confident necessarily of my, you know, abilities. And by the time I went to work for President Obama, I felt that I had lived another life. In between the Reagan and the Obama White House, I had like 20, 25 years where I was a working photojournalist and covered war zones and, you know, did all sorts of things and was a much better and seasoned photographer. And I think that even though I used the same approach, I think I was, you know, I looked at things a little bit differently because I was just 25 years more of experience.
And Dawn?
I felt like it was really important to highlight, first of all, Pete's journey, which, you know, no matter what profession you're in, you do evolve and change. I love, as a filmmaker, I love when we found the video footage of young Pete, you know, with Reagan. I mean, having spent time with Pete and then seeing, you know, young Pete was just like I couldn't get enough of it. Like the first, and so the producer was like, "There's a lot of Reagan in here." I'm like, "But did you see that footage? Did you see Pete on the table? Did you like?" At first, I wanted to start the film with Pete on the table because I was just like, if you know Pete, you know how hilarious like that footage is, and you see him being funny, and you see him finding himself. And we've all been in that position at work where we're like, "Whoa, like, you know, we're onto something here." But I also felt this is not a film about how great President Obama is or was. This is a film about the dignity of that office. And Pete's images in both administrations reflect that truth. So I felt like, you know, I was a person who protested Ronald Reagan's policies, you know, his slow ability to recognize AIDS, ketchup as a vegetable. I mean, in the environment, I could go on and on about, I lived in DC at the time. I lived on Capitol Hill. Literally, I feel like we were at the White House like every weekend. It was, you know, we'd go there and then go out to eat. Like it was, there were a lot of protests. So it wasn't, but I felt like that's why it was important for me with my political proclivities to really see what Pete saw and what he was showing us, which is you can disagree with somebody politically, but there's a certain respect for humanity that the President Reagan had. And that is, you know, in the examples of both leaders, what you see that is wholly absent from the current administration is the dignity and respect for the office of the presidency. And that's what Pete's photos give us in both occasions.
This is I don't know if I'm going to frame this question well, but I'm curious about posterity. One of the great things about films is they last for a very long time, and your film about Pete will last for generations probably. And then Pete, when you're the White House photographer, I imagine that posterity is something you're probably thinking about every day. Is this the moment that is going to sum up the presidency? There's a kind of a element of that in the film as well. So I guess I want to know about just what that is like when you're trying to capture what is essentially an ephemeral moment. It's here and it's gone, but you're aware that it could last for a very long time.
Yeah, and I think that I oftentimes you don't know in the moment that this is going to be a photograph for history. I mean, I looked back at some of the Reagan pictures today, and I think they really help reveal who he was as a human being. And maybe in the moment, I wasn't even thinking that. You know, you sort of see the same guy every day, and you're photographing him every day, and it's just another moment. But you know, you look at it 30 years later, and it's like, wow. You know, I've got that picture of John Travolta dancing with Princess Diana. And then 25, 30, 28 years later, I'm photographing President Obama meeting Princess Diana's grandson, Prince George. And, and I was probably the only one in the room who was like thinking about that as I was making that picture of Prince George. But I mean, it's kind of like one of those things where you don't know. I mean, one of my heroes is Yoshi Okamoto, who is LBJ's photographer. And, I used to tell people, I'm documenting for history. My photographs will be available for people to see in 50 years, and they'll have a good look at what President Obama was like. And Okamoto, I came across this audio-visual presentation he did back in, the 60s. And it was on one of those carousel tray slides, and
yes,
there was the audio tape that went along with it. And he was making the same point, except instead of 50 years, he said 500 years. And I was like,
wow.
Whoa, that sort of makes you really stop and realize the importance of the archive that you're creating.
Mm-hmm. And Don, I'm also curious about the differences as you might identify them between photography and film when it comes to posterity as well.
I think there's different types of photojournalism, right? And Pete has experience in a number of them. There's, going into a conflict zone where you're showing what is happening, that otherwise might be hidden. And that is also the kind of, Pete wouldn't call it journalism, but he would be, creating the historical record. And so there's an element of truth in that observation and that way of seeing. But what's common to documentary and to video is the author is really important, and who is behind the camera. And I think that's part of the reasons I like the title, because we aren't claiming this is the definitive story of the Obama presidency. This is what Pete saw. And these are some of the images that help us to see things through his eyes. And it's very important to me that Pete be present, that he not be the anonymous photographer, that something about Pete, that that he came from a pretty humble background and is now in the halls of power, that he is witness as kind of every person to these extraordinary events, and that they moved him and made him see. And I think, when you're a photographer doing work the way that Pete does, you're always looking for those moments. To Lindsay Addario says the same thing. You're looking for that moment that's going to encapsulate the feeling that you see in the room. And I think that that's what we're trying to do with film is, condense all of our experiences into something coherent.
Mm-hmm. Was he a hard subject to follow around with a camera, being a photographer?
Pete, what would you say?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, look, I don't like cameras. I don't like cameras pointed at me, and it's outside my comfort zone in a lot of ways. And knowing that I was going to be giving up even more anonymity was my one reservation about doing this film or participating in this film. But again, it came down to I owe this to people to participate in this film. I truly believe that. I mean, as we've seen what's happened in the last, few months, this is what happens when you have a person who doesn't provide leadership and isn't empathetic and is, essentially not competent. And I kind of had been warning about this for 3 years, and it finally came to a place where it's causing, grave damage and in many ways death. to too many people that could have been avoided.
Yeah. I'm teasing Pete, but actually, at first he was working, he was out on tour, he was speaking. So we had to figure out how to not get in the way of that, because we wanted to see what was really happening. But I think over time, I just really enjoyed, I would hear Pete talk about photos that were important to him, moments that were important to him. And then, it's pretty dreamy to have the opportunity to follow up and ask questions of somebody. So I just really appreciated the ability to ask everything that came to my to my mind. So
well, but also what was really the things, the parts of the film that just sort of like really, hit me in my heart is the interviews that Don did with subjects of my pictures, with, one of the Newtown families and a young 6-year-old boy who wrote a letter to President Obama. I don't want to give away the whole film, but it was those interviews and their stories that, to me, takes this film to another level. And and it was kudos to Don and the producers for trying to finish this film in the middle of COVID. Not an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
And fortunately, most of the interviews were done by March, but there's some that were impacted as a result.
Yeah.
And there were some interviews that I think she wasn't able to do because of COVID.
The last thing I want to ask, Pete, you mentioned 50 years or 500 years in terms of how long photos from a White House can last and can resonate. For each of you, is there a photo that you took, Pete, in the Obama White House that you hope is the one that lasts for 500 years?
Well, hopefully it's all of them. I mean, to me, no, I mean that seriously. To me, it's collectively, because people often ask me, oh, what's your favorite photo? And it's sort of like, I don't even know where to start. I think it begins with those fleeting moments where he's interacting with someone and it's totally an unexpected moment, the hair like mine photo, or looking in the window of the daycare center at the different kids, but also some of the family photos, the stressing over decisions. And I think the great thing about my job is I saw all these different compartments of his life. I was in the situation room with him. I was in, if there was a family vacation, I was there with him. So I sort of like, I think my job was I was the only person at the White House in his sphere that was in all these different parts of his life. And so it's hard to like zero in on one picture. I hope that people take the body of work and in 50 or 500 years, they get a real sense of what it must have been like to be president at this time, what he is like as a human being, and how did he do the presidency. And hopefully you can see that in all my photographs, and you'll be able to see that because every single picture I took is at the National Archives. So, and eventually every single picture will, be made public. I don't, I wouldn't tell anybody you should go through all 2 million photos, but if they want to, they can.
They'll be there. Yeah. And Don, for you, it's hard to do, of course, but for future historians, is there an image that you hope will sum up the Obama presidency?
I also think the body of work is important to, kind of view as a whole, because I think it does tell a story. And I think that there's something about sinking into those images that you get from reviewing them all. But there are, a few that I come back to over and over. Certainly Hair Like Mine. Certainly, Obama President Obama reaching out to a 5-year-old and, having that experience. But also, there are photos that Pete has taken of President Obama really wrestling with decisions. And for me, that in this moment, when I feel like we do not have a leader who is giving his all, who is, thoughtfully wrestling in the public interest, I feel like that sums up what Obama means to me as much as anything. That he was somebody I trusted. It's not always that I agreed, but I did trust that he was doing his best and that he was up to the job, and that the job is really serious. So,
yeah, and I mean, I just add one thing is that he used to say, he only the difficult decisions came to his desk, because if it was an easy decision, somebody else would have made it before it reached his desk. And oftentimes, as Sam Powers says in the film, there's no good options to a decision, and she specifically refers to Syria. There were no good options. So imagine that you've got to do something, and here's your 3 options, and they're all really bad.
Yeah.
But that's what a president has to do, has to calculate, and what's the best approach long term for the American people and for our safety. And it was not about what's good for me politically. It's about what's the best thing, what's the best decision I can make for the short term and for the long term. And I think that is, that's hopefully one of the things that comes across in the film.
It absolutely does. Pete Souza, Don Porter, thank you. Pete, thanks so much for your photos, for chronicling this historic presidency and reminding us of just the gravity of that office. And Don, thank you for this film and for all of your films as well, which really are portraits of the importance of American democracy. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much for having us at TIFF. We're just thrilled to be here.
We are thrilled to have your film. Thank you.